Yeah, voice training, dun dun dun. This is a Masc voice workshop, looking at kind of, making voice more masculine. Uh, so let's get into it. Um, so when it comes to voice training, there is like the effect of hormones on voice that we do often have to consider. So, um, it will impact like how easy or hard, or what kind of situation you're likely to be in when it comes to voice training. So some people who are transmasc will intend to go on T, some won't, and some will have access and some won't. So this is relevant. But so what does testosterone tend to do? So it tends to sort of like lower pitch and increase vocal weight. So we get something like more weighty and kind of intense out of the voice. So this is kind of happening because the vocal folds tend to get like longer and thicker. You might have some degree of kind of like resonance kind of change in the voice, though it's not necessarily a given. The earlier you have T, the more likely you are to have that change as well. So, if you're on T or you plan to go on T soon, you might find that you don't necessarily need to work as hard to get change in kind of weight and pitch when it comes to the voice. Um, but it doesn't necessarily mean those things will always change, because or like they won't necessarily change to the degree you want. So you might still want to give them some attention. Um, but there's other things in voice that won't change. So a lot of the time, like I mentioned, it won't necessarily kind of like change resonance in the voice. It won't necessarily change speech patterns and all of these kinds of things. So those things often do need to still see some attention. So yeah, behavioral habits can basically cause issues if you're kind of like trying to pass, and size or resonance is again a potential thing. So what if you don't want to go on testosterone or can't go on testosterone? Um, Voice training will probably take longer, and it will probably kind of require you to almost like shift your focus into a slightly longer term thing. Um, that you might want to kind of spend a little bit more energy on kind of like looking for what we call vocal fullness in the voice. Essentially kind of the mix between like weight and resonance and pitch. It's very common to kind of overshoot in kind of maybe one feature. So like sometimes you'll come across like transmass guys who aren't on T, and they'll kind of have something that sounds like really big or something like that, like kind of overshooting there, and it will kind of sound a little bit off. In that sort of scenario, it can actually be like more sense to kind of go a little bit smaller, because it might make the voice sound like more natural and more kind of like masculine, because it sounds like kind of more normal to kind of facilitate that. So we might want to kind of like adjust back in the direction always we wouldn't want, to kind of get a better result. But again, kind of like really is more ideal to kind of like focus on like seeing if we can change the other things a bit more, add more power into the voice, that kind of thing, to kind of like make it sound more masculine. So we're kind of like looking for that balance to make sure everything sounds as good as it can. um Speaking just in a different speech pattern as well, that can also have a pretty decent impact. Though, if you're, not on T, and you're looking to voice train and make your voice more masculine, then you might find that some voices are just kind of mostly inaccessible for you. Um, some people find luck with kind of like almost non kind of speechy sounds, or like not supernatural speechy sounds. So people might explore like subharmonics and things like that, to like see if they can get anything like a bit lower in things. So you can sometimes eke out a bit more with something like that, but it's not like gonna sound as normal as just like general speech would. So mileage varies basically. So I kind of mentioned fullness already, but it's like largely that relationship between size and weight. So if the space is big and the kind of like weight is soft, so it's kind of like fairly gentle, right? It's kind of quiet, and the space is big, then that'll sound kind of hollow and strange. If the size then goes smaller, then that pushes it in a more feminine direction. If we go kind of bigger again, and then we kind of go down in pitch, it starts to sound more normal, because pitch kind of inherently carries a bit of weight in the voice or in the sound. Um, if we then increase the kind of intensity more, then it sounds even more normal, right? So we kind of have this relationship where fullness is kind of like in the middle, it's kind of like what does typical sound like, and then depending on the mixture of features contributing to that, then we will kind of get a different mix overall. So this will kind of be underfull. Something like this would be overfull. Sometimes, like if you see trans guys on T, sometimes they'll have like something that's almost like you can kind of hear that it's still kind of like fairly small, but there can kind of be like more weight and kind of like lower pitch in the mix. You can get this kind of like overly warm, almost like buzzy quality. So in that sort of instance, kind of like moving from the like smaller size and deliberately going a bit larger can kind of fix up a problem like that. So what we're looking for generally is something fairly balanced. If you're going for something a little bit more androgynous, then lots of versions of androgyny actually kind of like jump into some of these like less kind of well-trodden zones. So that is something that you could potentially consider if that's something you're looking for. So here is a little graph that I drew the other day, talking about like this relationship. So green in here kind of represents like what does like fairly average full look like. This is not like to any kind of scale, it's just like a loose thing. So down in the left here we've got heavy and large, so like fairly heavy, fairly large, right? Up here we've got kind of like smaller and lighter. Then if we kind of moved along this continuum together, then we might end up kind of moving along this line here somewhere, right? So that's kind of down the middle. If we had light and large, then that would kind of sound like this. And if we had like heavy and small, that might be somewhere up here, right? And obviously there's lots of kind of space in between these kind of drastic examples that I gave. So, you know, if anybody wants that picture, just do let me know. In fact, I might even be able to copy paste it into here. Nope, that did not work. Maybe I can't. Maybe this is impossible. Image copied. Not pasting. Okay, never mind. We'll move on. So where do pitch and volume come into this picture? So this is a relevant question, especially if you're kind of not on T and you're looking to be able to project. So weight kind of sounds louder at high pitches. So if I'm weighty up high versus I'm kind of weighty down low, it's quite a different experience, right? So like it's quite loud when pitch is high and weight is high, whereas at lower pitches, then weight sounds quieter. This is somewhat relevant for people looking to masculinize because sometimes people like work on kind of getting louder and more intense. So like if you had something like this and then you try to get louder to really kind of like force the issue, almost like make it kind of read more masculine and kind of make it more full, then you can end up in this situation where you're too loud. So then you actually have to like lower pitch a little bit and you might end up going like a little bit quieter, but you can find maybe a little bit of a better balance doing it that way. Depending on the situation you're in, you might find that you want to be kind of like more weighty and kind of high pitched, or kind of like softer and like lower pitch, though, you know, a similar level of weight again. If you're kind of pre-T, you probably do want to spend extra energy just kind of like reaching for the lower pitches, because A, it tends to facilitate reaching for heavier sounds, which we would want anyway, but going for like the lower pitches tends to mean that your voice is like more kind of able to do its own thing in like multiple settings. So like you're not going to have to like cut the weight, for example, because you're in a church, because that weight's kind of baked into the lower pitch and you're not necessarily going to get quieter when doing that. So the first thing I want us to maybe have a go at doing is I want us to try out some kind of like explorations of these features. So if you kind of remember, then size is this kind of feature in the voice, or like down here it will kind of sound something like this, right? So we have like this kind of feature which we could potentially have a look at. So to start off with, normally the easiest way for us to maybe play with this is something like 1, 2, 3. If people are up for following along, can you have a go at kind of like yawning and trying to like speak through the yawn? Okay, I'm gonna assume that everybody gave that a go. I'm just gonna make sure I'm not being silly right now. And okay, I was maybe being a bit silly, so I just turned off noise cancellation. And probably didn't have any issues yet, but we were getting into the realm where we might have done. So what we can also try is something like doing a yawn and just like seeing if we can sustain a sound. And trying to like hold on to that larger size, maybe just starting off with a vowel if going directly into speech was a little bit difficult. So this next kind of like these small little pieces of text here is basically drawing us through like a couple more kind of things we can try doing. So if we've been able to find that initial kind of degree of control and awareness there through the yawn, what we can try to do is deliberately kind of like bring that to a point where we can actually use it. So we can try something like sliding down up from like the lowest point in the voice, and like most people with whatever range they've got available to them will find that their resonance starts to change a little bit as they move to kind of like a higher pitch or like a lower pitch too often. But we'll go higher just because it's easier for this particular exploration. So we go a little bit higher from like the lowest point, and then what we might try doing is kind of compare like whatever kind of smaller size we get to, and then we could try maybe seeing if we can do something similar, just like aiming for a kind of yawn sound at the same pitch. And just kind of move back and forth. If we can move back and forth, we can add more steps in. So the reason why we want to kind of fine tune the control instead of just like if going for like the larger size, if we've found that already, is because if we can do this on different vowels, on different pitches, we can make sure we don't end up with what I love to call Schrodinger's resonance. I don't know if it'll catch on. I want it to. But essentially, we can end up in a situation where some sounds sound larger than others and some sound smaller than others. So like you might have, say, oh, that sounds big, and people might find that like sounds like smaller after often. Like you can end up with a situation where they sound like a different kind of like level of size basically, and if you kind of turn that into speech, then it can end up in a situation where you kind of sound like your resonance is all over the place, and we don't really want that. So if the initial yawn didn't work perfectly, we've got some other explorations we can try. So we could try going for a kind of like ghosty noise, and we could try comparing it with like something where we actually try to like allow things to go a little bit smaller. Right, lots of silly sounds when we're doing this. We don't want to get super serious when doing any voice training stuff. Beyond just making sure nothing hurts, we don't really want anything to hurt, but we don't want to be too afraid of making silly sounds because that's often when we learn the most. So if we can kind of like jump between those two, then we could try with some more sounds again. Right, and we could try on a different pitch. These are not like the pitches you have to use, just kind of anywhere in your voice. If you can practice doing it on multiple pitches, you start teaching your brain to hear the difference between resonance and pitch, which is very useful normally. So I'll give you just a moment to see if you want to try either of those. So that could be like either the yawn versus like something a little bit more typical, or that could be the ghost. So and try kind of building from there. So try adding maybe a step in the middle between those if you feel up to it. So alrighty, I'm going to assume that everybody had a chance to at least try a tiny bit of that out. So when it comes to weight, things are a little bit kind of I don't know, people tend to have a slightly greater intuition for it on average, though that's not always true. So let's see how things go. So to start off with, something we can try doing is just kind of make a humming sound. Then we can try humming in the same place and getting louder. If we've done something like that, then congratulations, we've changed pitch. So that would be give that a go and see if you can hear a difference. Okay, so I see. Hopefully you had the chance to give that a go. And we can kind of make this a little bit harder by seeing if we can do it while keeping the sound steady. So we could try doing it again with speech. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And see if we can kind of build up that awareness again, much like we could do for the resonance beforehand. We could try doing it at different pitches. Now, this is kind of pretty great if we've got a degree of kind of vocal weight that, like a degree of range. So like if you're on T, then this kind of exploration should be enough to kind of like, you know, build up your control and agency, like playing with this and the resonance. You can try them in different combinations and see where you end up and find what you like. That said, you know, you might find that you don't necessarily have the degree of range you want, and this can contribute to help you with that. But we can actually try doing some additional things to kind of like, what am I trying to say? So we can do some additional things to kind of support that. I think I do actually get into that a little bit more further on. Right, yeah, so I get into that a little bit further on. But what we can do quickly first is something like trying to end for like one end of the spectrum with regards to weight and try sliding up and down with that. So if I started soft, I could try ending like aiming for that and seeing if I can do that kind of thing. Then we could try going for loud and do something similar. And you can get a feeling for what it's like to kind of have different like levels of weight as you kind of do that. One final exploration in this vein that we can look at is just kind of deliberately choosing a different size. So that might be like larger, maybe 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and see if you can kind of hear the difference between kind of like, you know, different levels of kind of weight and resonance together. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, right? So we can get a feeling for just what kind of shows up if we do that kind of thing, right? You can give that a quick go if you would like as well, if you feel up for it. That one's a little bit more tricky. Okay, so how should we practice moving forwards? So this is kind of particularly relevant for trans Masc guys on who aren't on T. But generally speaking, you're probably going to want to work for a decent amount of time on kind of like lowering pitch and like increasing the amount of weight you can hold on to when doing that. So one thing to kind of practice doing to make to help you do that is just kind of like practice talking with like a weightier sound in like a lower pitch, but not kind of like directly at the edge of your range, right? So like rather than kind of forcing everything out, we don't want to quite to get to that degree, right? We'd want to aim for something where it's like audibly kind of like slightly effortful, but like not kind of insane, right? We'd want to kind of like make sure it's kind of like near the end of the range you can get to, and you might want to see if you can practice holding on to like that louder sound, and over time you might be able to add in a little bit more variation to make it feel a little bit like more natural, but it's just going to be that kind of case of trying to hold on to as much weight as you can while kind of like staying near the edge of that range. Now you might want to also work in a little bit of kind of like talking a little bit softer, So like you might want to go a little bit lighter and then slowly practice increasing and kind of moving back a little bit, and just to make sure that like you can dynamically use it. A lot of people will kind of like stiffen up a lot when they're trying to force something, and then they don't necessarily maintain any kind of like control or awareness in that range. So rather than kind of like only doing kind of like super kind of extreme versions, try to like do stuff where you try to build control as well at the same time as being on the edge of your range, because that will normally net you kind of better results in terms of voice in the end. So another thing we can try doing, rather than kind of speaking near the edge of the range, we can try holding on to like the heaviest hum we can comfortably. People often find that when they're doing this, their voice might accidentally kind of weaken or lighten. What you'd be aiming to do is kind of like when that kind of thing's happening, try to add that kind of intensity back in. And try to just kind of hold on to that for as long as you can, preferably on one breath, right? An additional kind of thing we can do to kind of work to kind of find lower pitches and heavier weights is slide down in pitch and aim to get heavier. So and it would be just a case of trying to pick up as much weight as you can as you go down. Okay, so difference between weight and volume. So if we leave pitch in one place, they're actually really, really, really similar. So that's why it's kind of a little bit confusing. So the distinction is that if we change pitch, that then the relationship gets a little bit more complicated. So like if I'm down here, right, I don't know if you can hear it, but there's kind of like a pretty decent amount of weight in this voice. It's kind of like kind of rumbly. There's a little bit of kind of like richness, almost depth to it, intensity. If I kind of have that level of weight and then slide up in pitch with it, and I probably actually lightened a little bit as I went up, you can hear that it's starting to get super loud. Whereas like, if I'm kind of on this weight and then I kind of reduce the amount of weight while pitch stays in the same place, it suddenly gets really quiet. So largely pitch and weight, volume and weight are like really tied together if we stay in one place pitch wise. Now, technically, like closure can get in on that picture. So like some people might say that this sounds louder than kind of this. Like, so there is like a small relationship where like, yeah, closure fits into that picture a little bit, but it's like it's very marginal in comparison to the volume change. Does that kind of make sense? I want to say Zemo. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce your name. Okay. So yeah, hopefully that made sense. But yeah, so we'd aim to kind of slide down in pitch and get heavier, which is roughly similar as trying to get louder as we go down. But what we want to avoid doing is kind of like slipping into vocal fry when we do it. So we wouldn't want we want to basically avoid that fry for as long as we can. It's very common to start slipping towards it. So if you had like a drift towards it, then you just probably go back up again. And try to kind of practice reattempting kind of sticking out of it while holding on to that kind of louder sound, and you're aiming to get kind of like louder as you go. And hopefully over time, if you kind of practice it for, not just one sitting, but kind of like over time, then you'll practice being able to go lower in pitch, which technically increases weight, and also practice getting louder at the same time, which also increases weight. I don't know if I said, yeah, so when we go down in pitch, it increases weight as well. So weight is kind of like lurking behind pitch as well. So when we don't just want to kind of aim for like, heavier sounds when we're sliding down in pitch, ones where we're like deliberately seeking to be loud as possible, because when we're thinking about what's going on in terms of the vocal folds, sometimes if we go exclusively for this version of kind of like louder and kind of more intense, sometimes it can kind of encourage a sort of more closure dominant kind of thing where we're relying on a lot of it almost to kind of like happen from a place of like, oh, we're jamming the vocal folds together as much as possible, and now they're maybe not as vibrating as much, which, you know, might kind of assist us, but it's almost like we want to actually have a more balanced approach than that. So we want to kind of maybe try approaching it from another side too. And that would mean try maybe sighs and kind of yawns. And try to just bring it down, even if it's like the weakest, quietest like sound. See if you can kind of slide down with that kind of thing. We can think of it as kind of maybe getting like quieter or lighter as we go down, but we're looking to just kind of hold on to like the lowest pitch we can get to, and over time kind of increase the depth to which we can take that. And this is kind of a project that people will often find like net results on the scale of months, not one that's kind of like, ah, yes, I did it for 3 days and now like suddenly it's working. So it would kind of be like every moment you remember, practice kind of like sliding down, maybe trying to get heavier, maybe trying to kind of stay light but kind of take it as far as you can go, but just trying to like get to the lowest pitch you can. That's kind of an ongoing project. And for like some trans guys on T who maybe didn't have as much change in that department as they want, then that's an ongoing project. But for pre-T guys, that's almost like a more of a necessity to some extent, because that's how more range can kind of be opened up. So aside from that, things to practice. So practice modifying like size and resonance in speech. So like, you know, just being able to like say sentences and modify it. Like, you know, this is like less of a like, oh my god, you must do this because it's always required, and more of a like, when you're refining your voice and where you want to figure out where you want it to be, then having that degree of control makes it a little bit easier. If you can practice doing that, starting at different pitches and kind of like levels of vocal weight when you do it, then you'll be able to kind of again have more control and more agency around where you end up. Somebody's typing, so I'll just quickly wait to see what they were saying before I jump on to the next little bit. Yes, so size is not something I described. Let's talk about what resonance is first, because that should hopefully make it make sense a little bit more. So resonance is basically what happens when you have like a sound and you play it through a space. So if I go onto my phone right now and I get some like brown noise on my kind of noise generator, it should sound like this kind of hiss that you can hear here. So if I take this and I hold it up to my mouth, you'll probably notice that the sound changes a little bit. So we can hear that the sound changes when it kind of goes from a big open space to like the enclosed space in my mouth, right? So similar stuff is kind of happening with speech. So when we change the like space that's going on, the sound changes. But if I kind of hold this up to my mouth and then I change the shape of my throat and mouth, you should hopefully be able to hear that not just taking my phone away and from my mouth will change what it sounds like, but also like changing the shape of my throat and mouth changes how that sounds. When we run into kind of like changing the shape of our mouth to get different sounds out, the place we run into that most in speech is actually kind of consonants. So like for example, like I'm moving the tip of my tongue to the top of my teeth and then I'm like doing something, like in this case it's like I'm adding air, right? And kind of getting that sound out. That's a little bit different to how we generally mean resonance in voice training, just because it's like a little bit more distinct, I guess. But if I kind of go from an E to an R, then to do that, I'm like largely moving my tongue, maybe my jaw moves a little bit, all of these like little kind of posture changes in my mouth, but changing the shape of that space suddenly gets me a whole new like sound out of the space, right? We can definitely hear the big difference that posture has on voice if we kind of move from one vowel to another. And if you play around with like moving from a few different vowels from one to another, you should be able to feel that like stuff is moving around in your mouth and throat. E, O, U, R, right? Feel free to just have a go at kind of making some vowel sounds and see if you notice any movement. And when it comes to size, it's somewhat what it says on the tin, but rather than kind of changing like the shape of my mouth, so instead of moving my tongue back to go from an E to an R, E, R, for example, tongue moves back, then what I might do instead is kind of change the amount of overall space I'm using when I'm making these shapes, when I'm making these like vowel sounds. E, R, E, R. So when I do that, like we can hear it's like a bigger size, the resonance is lower, and we have sort of like a larger space going on, right? If the space is smaller, then we have like a smaller sound, like a higher resonance, let's say, a more feminine quality. But I'm still keeping that same kind of tongue motion, generally the same. So like the shape is kind of like staying fairly consistent, but the overall kind of amount of size that I'm using when making that kind of sound is quite different. So that's generally what we mean by kind of size in voice. So it's basically like tied to the gender, but largely kind of equates to larger size on average, more masculine, larger size on average, more feminine. Sorry, smaller size on average, more feminine. I can't speak English. Um, so yeah, resonance. Wait. Um, But yeah, basically we have like these different shapes, these different sounds that we get out. They basically highlight different frequencies like in the sounds we make, which makes us hear like speech and words. So, they're quite handy. But yeah, so aside from kind of like controlling size and resonance, in general, we also might want to get you to just do it while practicing with different levels of pitch or vocal weight, if I didn't mention that already, just to kind of build up more control. And then you also probably want to start at some point thinking about sort of like the way that speech patterns and gender norms and things kind of play into things. Now, the thing about this is that some of this, it feels a little bit more individual. So speaking patterns can differ a lot from person to person, whereas gender norms are maybe like fairly consistent within a single place, but they also interact with like personal speech patterns. So it's kind of like more a rule of kind of average kind of like drifting into certain kind of behavioral kind of like habits for like where you live, right? And these kind of things, they do convey a certain amount of gender. So you might have heard things like men talk more monotone and they mumble and they don't really say anything of value. um I don't know where that came from. That's not what I meant to say. I'm sure that is actually a sentiment some people say. But so we have like a larger size, right? And we might kind of have like a weightier sound and stuff, but we also might have kind of these speech norms that are kind of like, oh yeah, like less articulate, less articulate in terms of sort of like pronunciation is quite common. Like it's genuinely a thing. Like on average, women have a sort of better defined vowel space, whereas guys are slightly more mumbly on average. You might have less pitch variation, but you might kind of have more kind of like weight change to kind of emphasize things. So the voice might kind of change in intensity more, but you might have less pitch change to convey similar information. So there can be like things like that going on. And obviously, this is just like 100% a thing of like different individuals will do things differently, just as kind of overall norms. So if we want to kind of get a feeling for this, normally the best way to do it is like look for masculine voices in a place where you live to get a better feeling more directly for it and get a feeling for what options you have available. You can try copying like the general patterns of the speech. You can try doing it with more dramatic voices first. So you could try like voice actors first and try copying the general like speech like flow. If you struggle with kind of that awareness of kind of pitch stuff, then you might try kind of humming along to music first, and like hum along to ones that are outside of your range, to get used to kind of doing it in an offset and things like that, so that you can kind of build up some more awareness in that vein. But you can try applying these things to like different voices you do. You can also start with like mimicking a voice. So I haven't got any super great examples stuck in my mind, but we might have something like but don't get me wrong, that's vintage, right? So I'm just thinking of this random guy's voice, quite a gay voice, I suppose. But we can sort of like take that and we can actually try applying different changes on top of it with regards to like these other features that we've already touched on. So like we can use them as jumping off points to really explore around. So we could have, don't get me wrong, that's vintage. Don't get me wrong, that's vintage. Don't get me wrong, that's vintage, right? So on and so forth. And we can try lots of different kind of combinations of things. And if we found something we liked, don't get me wrong, that's vintage. We could try talking in a similar style, right? Maybe not the best example for this, but you can definitely look for different voices that might kind of fulfill the kind of fulfill the role that you're looking for. So we already touched on this, but if you're pre-T or not on T, then lowering pitch and gaining weight over time is going to be a pretty kind of important thing you're going to want to work on for a longer term. So, make a sustained effort. Don't do it for like 2 days and then forget. Try to make a routine or make routine things out of it. So like every time you go to the kitchen you do it, or every time you walk through a doorway, like try to tie it to something else to make it easier to remember. And then you might need to do that less as you get more used to kind of thinking about it. Try to engage multiple times a day, like maybe in some longer chunks, but also like try to do like literally anytime you remember. So the next one's pretty important. If you start feeling like your voice is hoarse or like strained or uncomfortable, if things hurt, that's normally a sign to take a break. You're not kind of going to get better results because like it hurts more or anything like that. It's not no pain, no gain. It's more like effective management of pain leads to faster results instead. And ideally we want to kind of like avoid confusing like weight with closure. So like we don't want to go for that kind of like super closed up instead of like going for like something more intense. So we can kind of hear the difference, right? So things that we might want to include in this, vocal warm-ups more generally. So that could be lip trills, that could be straw and water. I don't have some straw and water with me right now, so I won't do that demo, but we might try finding just some additional things that we didn't mention earlier, finding like the heaviest sounding weight we can, maybe at the like lowest pitch we can as well, and sustain for as long as you can comfortably. Slide down in pitch and get heavier as you go. Already mentioned this one. And then doing it in relaxed state. Yep. And yeah, practice at different times of day to see how your voice changes over that period of time. See if there's any differences. Okay, so closure versus vocal weight. They can sound a bit similar. You might have noticed that they often actually go kind of hand in hand. Closure is a bit more about like how open the kind of vocal folds are. So like one end of the spectrum is often kind of like really kind of breathy and like open, whereas like the other end of the spectrum is like really closed up and like not really kind of able to get sound out. But voices tend to exist somewhere in the middle of that. So like rather than having like every single other word like not being able to come out because it's too open, we're more likely to end up with something that's kind of like somewhat airy versus kind of like a little bit more normal versus kind of like a little bit more kind of like closed up versus like overly closed up. So it kind of exists on a continuum, right? We're unlikely to kind of run into most people's voices being kind of like at the very extremes, but we're also looking sorry, to find a good kind of balanced medium point if we can. So closure and airflow will impact this. So like how closed up the vocal folds are and airflow, but they're not like wait, I was talking about weight. Oops, that was so closure and airflow are kind of like obviously like slightly different things to one another, but they're also very tied up in weight, in what weight's up to. So when we're going for like a heavier sound, you can imagine that there's kind of like more force involved, right? Like to get that like heavier, more intense sound out, I'm probably pushing harder with the amount of air I'm using, right? But what we're not necessarily letting happen is letting it kind of sneak past, and we're not kind of only kind of cramming the vocal folds together, because that might end up with like instead, which is kind of like a different sound to like if that kind of distinction kind of audibly makes sense. The difference between these two is like the kind of like super closed up version is like if I just crammed my vocal folds together, whereas like the kind of more kind of weighty sound actually comes more from kind of like more of the vocal fold itself actually being involved in the vibration. And to some extent, like we do expect to see some structural changes to the vocal folds over time. So like using a heavier weight and getting used to doing so will often actually increase the like amount of weight that you have to work with, basically. Um, so we also want to just bear in mind that too much closure can kind of be a little bit rough on the voice. Um, because like you can imagine just kind of cramming things together as hard as you can, not the most comfortable experience. And it's kind of like if you've not got the weight there to kind of back it up, if you've not kind of built in sufficient weight, then what you can end up with is kind of your voice might kind of like, it's kind of like the difference between relying on a like thick dam to hold something back, like a, you know, like a wall of water back, versus kind of relying on like um oh, sorry. Let me re-say that. So it's like relying on like tissue paper to hold back water, which is like if your vocal folds are like smaller and kind of like less weighty in like whatever posture they're in, versus kind of and like you know just cramming them together and holding it as tight as you can, versus kind of like choosing a more like resistant material to do it. So like a rock or something, right? So paper versus a rock, one of those is a little bit better at holding things back. So let's jump forwards a little bit. And you know, while tissue paper is a little bit of a dramatic example, you know, while tissue paper might get torn holding stuff back, your voice is unlikely to, but it can like definitely make it more prone to damage, right? So we want to be careful about that. But so you know, in many ways, masculinization voice-wise is a little bit harder on the voice than feminization, especially because we're looking at those kind of heavier, potentially weightier, potentially higher closure sounds. Um, we want to kind of like pay attention and make sure that like if things feel scratchy or tense or hoarse, we want to kind of like pull back on however we're approaching that and maybe look for a new way or maybe take a break. Sometimes you have just like sometimes you do just need a break. Try to engage with like softies. I mentioned them before, but lip trills. So and then straw and water is just like get a straw, put the tip just pretty much under the water and like blow bubbles and make sound at the same time. That kind of acts as like a bit of a massage for the voice, and we just want to make sure these are as comfortable as possible. We might kind of move up and down through the range and just kind of warm up the voice at the same time. So you might start the day by doing that, and then you might periodically do it as well. If you kind of like wore out your voice, you might aim to kind of do a few more because they have a bit of a rehabilitative effect. But you would want to kind of take a break before you jumped into them if you tired your voice out. So other stuff we can do to just generally look after the voice and look after vocal health, try to avoid leaving kind of like issues if you think you have one untreated. So acid reflux is one. If you feel like you've got like smoke inhalation damage or something, then that would be another thing to go speak to somebody about. All these kind of different things, like try to make sure you're looking after your voice. Like don't leave medical problems unattended, basically. Reduce or avoid kind of smoking, drinking, caffeine intake, so on and so forth. Like we want to kind of do ourselves a favor and look after our voice. This includes vaping, sadly, but or like not sadly, not everybody necessarily wants that. But anyway, so don't ignore pain again. Try to avoid exposure to things that like mess up your voice, pollen, mold, exhaust, smoke, so on and so forth as well, and stay hydrated. Final one, which like is like a little bit less likely I think for transmask people if they're kind of like working pretty steadily on kind of increasing vocal weight, but like don't allow yourself to like get out of the habit of using your voice. If you use it for less than an hour a day, chances are your voice will grow weaker over time and it will become harder to produce the amount of weight we're looking for. That is actually the last slide on this presentation, but hopefully this has been able to introduce some of the core ideas to you all. Before we jump into maybe one-on-one stuff, does anybody have any questions they want answered, like any questions they want to ask? Yes. So SOVT stands for semi-occluded vocal tract exercise. What it basically does is like hold back some of the air so that it kind of acts as a bit of a cushion. So you can imagine that we have our tissue paper holding back all this massive force. Let's say I'm not sure why we're sticking with tissue paper, but let's say we are. So we've got our tissue paper and it's holding back all this air all by itself, working very hard. Um, but if we kind of like slow down the flow on the other side, so if I kind of like close my mouth and like cover one nostril, then the air's gonna kind of slow down. And what that does is rather than kind of the vocal fold or our tissue paper having to hold all that air back all by itself, instead we have kind of this amount of kind of air cushion almost on the other side that's like not entirely kind of resisting the force, but it kind of like acts as a bit of a back pressure on the vocal folds to mean that they're not having to work as hard to hold back all that air on their own. Does that kind of make sense? Okay. Any other questions, humans? No pressure to have questions. Though, if you have them, speak now, forever hold your peace. I promise I won't yell at you if you don't have questions. Um, okay, so I can only assume that nobody has any questions. Does anybody want to get some one-on-one work in? There's no pressure to do that either. We will just wrap up here if nobody wants any one-on-one. But does anybody want any one-on-one time? So that would be one-on-one in this room where other people can. Yep. You're comfy with being recorded, yeah? Or if you're not, we can pause the recording. But if you are comfortable, that's the preference. Okay, okay. So what I will do is you should hopefully be able to talk if you leave and rejoin. Or wait, did they change that? Hmm.
Uh, um, no, it hasn't.
Okay. Okay. Good. 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 So yeah. So what do you want to work on?
Um, can I can I work on the dropping of the oh right sliding down in pitch.
Mm. So working on the kind of sliding down and pitch. Have you got any like? Have you played around with this kind of idea before?
Um, I kind of
Mm.
wait. I was trying to put more. I'm scared of adding uh volume when I drop my voice in
Sorry,
pitch
I feel like
because I have neighbors.
your mic is like not like picking you up consistently.
Oh, yeah, I don't have a microphone. I'm using the one externally from my laptop.
Oh, okay.
Uh, mm,
Yeah, it's just like getting a little bit like loud sometimes and then like quiet other times. But yeah, we will do our best. But so yeah, so when you've been playing around with like going down lower, yeah, you said that something was kind of going wrong or like not working well, or
um, when I try to reach C4, when I
mm,
try to get there, it kind of breaks. Well,
can
it breaks a lot actually.
mm,
It feels weak. When the deeper I get, like down in pitch, humming.
yeah. Do you think you could show me?
Mm,
Oh, okay. I think I know what's going on. I think you might have like Discord's noise suppression on. So do you think we could go into user settings and then voice and video,
User settings.
and
All right.
then
Okay.
there should be like an input profile. Can you select studio?
In in voice. Oh, studio. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, we basically just want Discord to
With
not
no. Yeah.
cancel.
With no. Oh,
No
okay. Yeah.
processing. Yeah. So yeah, could you show me that slide again?
Okay. Mm,
Okay, so you are hitting a
it
bit of a
breaks a
wall.
bit.
Yeah. Um, so I did just want to check in. I think you said like C4 before, right? I think this is lower than that, right?
Really?
So are you saying that like are you saying that like you run into weakness when you try to get down to C3? Is that what you meant?
Um. I said C4. Well,
Yeah.
that's just kind of a goal I was trying to go for.
This might seem like a really dumb question. I'm not sure if I'm getting it. So are you trying to like go up
Yeah. No
past
worries. Ask.
C4 or are you trying to go down?
Sorry.
So like where your
I'm
voice
trying to
is,
go further down.
right, yeah. So I think where you're speaking right now is like below C4, right? Like it's sort of like,
Oh, okay.
yeah. Um, so I'm wondering if maybe like you're thinking C4, but is actually like C3 you're talking about, maybe?
C3. Um.
Mm,
Oh, right,
mm,
right. I guess I can. Yeah, I can go further than
okay.
C3,
Uh, yeah. So can you demo the slide for me
but
again real
not
quick?
consistently.
Right. Okay. So when you do,
Mm,
sorry, go ahead. Go
yeah, yeah,
ahead.
yeah. Sorry.
I,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, okay. Mm, mm,
Okay. Something is still wanting to filter you out, which is very strange. But um, if it's not Discord, I have no idea what's doing it. That said, um, when you slide down there, are you like going for any specific like end of the spectrum? Are you just going for like middle of the road, like going for heavier, going for just kind of like light, or is there any like particular vibe you're aiming for?
trying to go for heavier. I'm aiming for heavier.
Okay. And what's happening is just like you lose power, right? It just kind of like fades out.
Yeah, yeah.
So if we're aiming to kind of like hold on to more power, um, then we can do a couple of things. So while this isn't like super speech relevant, right? You can try kind of like tilting your head up as you kind of go further.
Oh, okay.
Because obviously we can't necessarily tilt the head up when we're doing the speech. Otherwise, it's going to seem quite strange. But it can help you find like something that's a little bit heavier because I it doesn't actually matter what we're doing, like mechanically speaking. Cricothyroid tilt if you're interested in that. But basically it kind of changes the kind of way that the vocal folds kind of like meet each other, so we can get like slightly more kind of weight out basically. So yeah, can we have a go at getting you to kind of slide down and get louder, but kind of tilt your head back as we give it a try?
Mm,
Did you notice any change?
yeah, yeah.
Like
It's
easier
a bit
or
consistent and clear,
okay.
clear
Yeah.
and consistent. Like it's
Mm.
stretching everything.
Mm. Yeah, so what we could try doing, right, is we could have a go at kind of like doing the slide. Maybe the first time we do like more head tilting. Then the next time we could try getting a similar sound, but trying to tilt the head less. Uh, Try and get like a similar change each time, but like tilt the head less each time. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Could you give that
Do
a
you
go?
want me to replicate? I mean,
Mm.
imitate. Should I imitate?
Yeah, you can try imitating if you want, or you can just kind of take it through in your own kind of like comfy kind of way.
Okay. Hmm. Ah. Ah. Ah.
And how did how
It's,
did you feel like you were able to hold on to it, or?
yeah, yeah. I was able to this time, but just raising my head only less and less each time.
Mm-hmm.
It felt yeah, it felt more less restrained. It felt clearer and less restrained
Yeah. So
than
that's
before.
definitely like something we it's like a cheat, right? It's like we can find the thing we're looking for and then try to bring it back with us.
Yeah.
Um, so that can make it a little bit easier. Are you like currently more generally playing around with like the light slides down as well, or have you only been playing around with the like heavy slides down?
I've been doing more of the heavy side.
Okay, so this might seem like a strange suggestion, but I would actually suggest you try on the other side too, um, because when people go up
Yeah.
in pitch from like something like lower, they tend to be able to pick up more weight
Mm.
anyway. But if you practice kind of like doing it on the like light side first, you often have like a little like it kind of teaches you a different way to approach it. So much like we can kind of cheat like by tilting the head to maybe learn a little bit of something different, we can also try like going for like the very light kind of like sliding down. And then when we try like grabbing onto that and bring it up higher, like obviously I'm kind of cheating, but like you can actually often have more weight when you do it that way than if you kind of like do it without, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I got that.
So would you be up for trying to go for like a very relaxed, like maybe half yawn, half sigh, kind of like slide down?
Uh, sure. Wait. Uh, uh, is that question? Wait. What do you mean by this question?
Yeah, could
Sorry.
you which question? Like could you give it a go? Or
Oh, is that what you're asking?
yeah, yeah, that's what I'm hoping you'll give a try to.
Oh, right. Yawn to sigh.
Yeah, like a kind of sigh or like a yawn, like a just a very relaxed kind of like
Okay.
we'll allow ourselves to go kind of airy. This is like trying to teach us not to conflate kind of like closure with like weight, if that kind of makes sense to some extent.
Right. Right. Um. Okay.
Can you try going for Oh, okay. I think that's closer to what I was thinking. But yeah, like on the first couple there, I feel like it didn't sound like very airy, right? It was kind of like slightly more to the other side, possibly. It
Right.
wasn't.
Right.
Um, so
Okay.
while we're not necessarily looking for like, oh my God, it must be super airy, we are looking for that kind of relaxed. We're not kind of like trying to like get more closure to like facilitate this. We're trying to do it in a like really kind of like relaxed. Hopefully the vocal folds can like chill out as much as they can. Just because sometimes we can get into like
Right.
habits of approaching it almost in one way. Um and that can kind of hold us back a little bit. So like giving ourselves the chance to kind of explore in different fashion basically can help quite a lot. Um and what if we try going from a yawn specifically, like a like full on largest size we can, and just kind of take that far as it go. And does it feel like it wants to kind of zone out, like halt when you kind of draw it down?
ends pretty soon for me.
Yeah. So what we'd want you to maybe play around with that is like see if you can start with that very, very relaxed and just like slowly take it a little bit further each time you try. Because like I mean I think you could hear with my kind of version, it still wants to kind of like fade out a little bit for me. Like it's still like tentative and on the edge, right? Um, but what we can aim to do is just kind of like practice like finding like the coordination where we're relaxed as possible, like maybe just doing just enough to keep the voice going. And if we can do that, it often will help us like over time build up that kind of like almost like muscle memory to do this in a like slightly more relaxed way and hopefully get more benefits out of it by approaching it from both angles rather than just approaching it from one.
I see.
Yeah, I know it's kind of like, but this is, I want it to sound heavy, but what tends to be the case is you'll probably find it easier to actually produce um, heavy sounds as well if you kind of practice from both ends, because I think what can sometimes happen
Yeah,
is like you get into like a habit of doing it in one very specific way, and then you can often like miss like you know it's kind of like I don't know like anything like if you had like a I don't know a gold mine on like one side of a valley and you were like yes there's so much gold over here I never have to swap over, but then like if you just like spent like 20 minutes like digging a little bit deeper on the other side you might go oh. So there's definitely stuff to be gained from approaching it from both sides. um was mm, like I know that it was just like a fairly like general kind of like wanting to practice working on kind of like reaching for like heavier sounds and things, but was there any like specific like direct like more guidance you were looking for in that vein?
um, I can't say because this is my first, yeah, my first, this is my first time attending one of these, and
Ah,
also because I'm still very new to this, I
okay,
couldn't really
yeah, that's
say
fair,
what it
that's
is
fair.
I'm hoping to achieve today.
Yeah, no, that's fair, that's fair. um but yeah, if you want to kind of like take things a little bit further, then like rather than just kind of like doing the slides, right? You could also try like broaching it into speech. So like one, two, three, where you try to like build off it. Versus if you were going for like deliberately getting heavier one, then you could try like going into speech from there as well. So you can kind of like see what happens if you try like approaching it with like the intent of going directly into speech. So you're looking for like like a continuation almost to kind of like apply. That's often something that holds people back. So apply what you learn as well, I guess.
Okay. Yeah. Uh, okay. I understood that. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, anything else you wanted to practice right now, or shall we move on and see if anybody else has anything?
I think this was something I just wanted to try. Not necessarily anything else yet because I'm not too confident.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. You're welcome. I hope I hope I managed to help. Does anybody else have anything, or if not, we might think about wrapping up here. Lettuce or Bianca, do you have anything? Or I don't know. Is that your username? Anybody? You hello? Do either of you? Okay. Dun dun dun. You may not be here. You may have fallen asleep. Which is totally valid. You're valid. Um, but yeah. Um, Okay, yeah, that's fair as well. You are allowed to listen, that is valid. Okay, so assuming that nobody else has any other stuff, then we'll probably just wrap up in a mo. I will take this moment to just be like, yeah, if you know people looking for lessons, feel free to like share me around and let people know that I exist. That's always appreciated. If you are looking for lessons yourselves, then of course you can uh, book those through my website and things. If you're looking for more resources, then the like lesson, like the workshop recording and lessons recording and stuff, kind of like channels may be of use. And also, there are other resources if you look in. I think it's in Addy resources in the information section. There might be further resources for you to check out potentially. So a little bit of mix of stuff to be aware of and maybe look at. But yeah, other than that, I will disappear and I'll wish you all good luck practicing. And yeah, all right. Stop